Hey class, in this video we're going to take some of the concepts we looked at in the first video and we're going to use them to create a meaningful interaction with our self-portrait. So I'm going to talk about the different ways that we can interact with the self-portrait and show a few examples. And then I'll give an example of how to create a meaningful interaction and also how to add instructions. So let's get started. So as usual, I'll open up GitHub. I have some changes from the previous video where I created the new self-portrait. I'm just gonna leave those for now. I'm gonna go to the repository and click in Open in Sublime Text. And because this is a new project, well, actually, let's do that at the end. So I'm gonna go to self-portrait version 3, open up my sketch, and we can see there's a couple changes from what we did in the last video where we're making the X in the middle of the canvas. I'm going to go to Tools and make sure my Sublime server is running, and then open a new window. And let's go to localhost 8080, MMP 210. And I haven't added the link yet, so I'm just going to type in self-portrait version 3 at the end of the URL and get my console open. So we'll talk about the different ways that we can make a self-portrait interactive, and then we'll use a new function that's going to add a little bit more control to how we interact with the self-portrait, and then we will make a meaningful interaction with our self-portrait. There's 3 different things that we can change using variables, but there's a lot of different things that we can do with them. So the 3 things, and we've already looked at 2 of them. So in the last video, we looked at how to change the position. So we can change the position of the whole self-portrait or different components of the self-portrait. We can change the size. So again, we can change the size of the different shapes in the self-portrait or the self-portrait itself. And we can also change colors. Okay, so that's what we'll look at more in this video. And we'll look at how all of those things are basically just using numbers. So 150 when it's assigned to Y means something different than 162 when it's assigned to the red value of the face, but both of those numbers are just numbers that could be swapped in any part of our self-portrait. So for example, if we go in to our self-portrait down here, and instead of face red, I use Y, and instead of Y, I use face red, it's going to make our self-portrait look different, but because those are just numbers, it's still going to work. In fact, it almost looks exactly the same. You can't even really see the difference because those numbers are so close together. One is 150, one is 162. So we can barely notice the difference. If I undo this, it gets a little bit more pink, it moves up a little bit, but we can barely see the difference. If we substituted Y in for face green, okay, you can see a little bit more change in the color. If I change for blue, now we see a bigger difference in the color. So even though we have variables that represent different things, we're only using numbers, and we can use numbers to do whatever we want. So we can change all those numbers in similar ways. So one way that we discussed in the previous video is changing the position. If I do something as simple as X equals mouse X, now my whole self-portrait moves with the X value. Okay, so that's not very exciting by itself, but you could imagine making a game where you have to move the self-portrait back and forth to avoid, falling obstacles or something like that. We can do the same thing by saying Y equals mouse Y. Because we use these variables, I can use the mouse to change the self-portrait. We can also change the size. So if I say eye size equals like frame count, then the eyes are going to change over the course of our self-portrait. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use the variables to change different values. With the size and the position, the relationship between the position of the mouse and what we're seeing on the screen is much more clear. So when I say X equals mouse X, there's a very clear relationship between the mouse moving and the self-portrait moving as well. With the size, it's a little less clear, but it's still easy to tell what's happening. If I say eye size equals mouse Y, then even though the eyes don't move with the mouse, we can see as we move the mouse, the eyes are getting bigger and smaller. So it's easy to see that connection. One place where it's a little bit harder to see that connection is with the color. So I can also say, for example, face red equals mouse Y, and now our color changes as we move the mouse. Okay, so there's no real relationship between the color and the position of the mouse, but we've created one by referencing one with the other. So if we are going to use our mouse X and mouse Y to change the color, we have to look at what are the ranges of those values. And there's a function that can really help us with this. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly change the red and blue to 0. And I'm going to set the face red to mouse Y. And I want you to look at what happens. So when we're at the top of the screen, Y is 0. And so the color of our self-portrait is black because Y is 0, the red is 0, green and blue are all 0, and that adds up to 0. So we get black. As I move the Y value down, at a certain point we hit red, like we're changing. But then for a while, there's no change, right? Because the highest value that's possible on red is 255. So once we get past wherever that is, somewhere down here, then the red doesn't change anymore. So see, changing, no changing. And the problem is that we have two different ranges. Y goes from 0 up here to 360 down here. But the red value only goes to 255. So once we get past 255, everything from like 255 down, that just gets ignored basically. In P5, there's a function we can use to fix that problem, and that's the map function. So map is basically a mathematical equation that maps one value to another. So if we go to the reference and go to math, you'll see the map function right here. And we'll see an example of that. So it's a more complicated function than the ones we've seen in the past because it takes 5 different values and it basically converts one value from one range to another. Here's an example of the mouse map function. So here's a browser window that I've opened. You can see that the browser window is 800 pixels wide, 803. So the width goes from 0 to 800. And what I want to do is I want to map the X position to a color. Here's my color gradient. So 0 to 255 gives me the values between black and white. And we can see that what the map function does is it converts this number, X, whatever it happens to be, into a color. So if X is down here, 0, then our color is also 0. If X is way up here at 800, the color stops at 255. And then if X is in the middle at like 400, our color is 127. So it does the math to divide that range in half. So that's really what the map function is doing, is it's mapping one range to another range. And we can use that to create better interactions. So let's look at that with our color. So instead of face red equals mass Y, what I need to do is I need to say with map, I have the value that I want to map. So face red equals, and then the map function. And then the arguments for the map function are the value that changes. Okay, so that's the mouse Y. So I'll say mouse Y here. And then the min and max of the range of that value. Okay, so the minimum value for Y in our canvas is 0. That's the top of the canvas. The maximum value for Y is the height of the canvas. So we could put 360 there, but because we know that that value is just height, we can just put height there, so if our canvas changes, we don't have to change that variable. And then the lowest value for a color is 0. The highest value is 255. And so now, when we go back to our self-portrait, we have 0 at the top, and then we go all the way down to red at the bottom. So we can see there's changing down here, and there's changing up here. And the nice thing about the map is that we can even reverse those values. So let's say I wanted to change that interaction. I could put 255 at the top, and 0 at the bottom. So maybe in your instructions to the user, you could say, move the mouse down the page to, add more red to the screen, or add more, whatever is happening in your scene. Maybe there's more fire, or there's more, something that's going to be red, more blood or something like that, not to be too morbid. So the map function is a really easy way to create interaction that maps between one range of values, like the size of the canvas, and another range of values like the color of our character. So let's think about a way that we can create a meaningful interaction. And I'm just going to do a very simple version of this with my character. I'm gonna go back to make sure I'm just gonna undo all this. There we go. So what can I do with my character to create a meaningful interaction? That's something that the user would want to be able to do. There's a lot of different ways you could take this, using the color, using the shapes, using the sizes. It doesn't have to be like, a whole built out video game where you're jumping over objects and stuff like that, but we're just looking for something simple that the user can do that will be kind of fun. So what I want to do is make my character talk. And so I'm going to scroll down here and look at the mouth. So there's a lot of things I can do with the mouth, but something that's really easy is the mouth size. Okay, so I'm just going to change the height of the mouth. I'm going to leave the width the same, and I'm going to leave this the same, but I'm just going to change the height of the mouth here. And so instead of doing mouth size over 2, I'm going to map the height of the mouth to a mouse value. So I'm going to make a new variable for this. I'm going to say mouth height, and I'm going to set that to map the mouse y variable. Mouse y goes from 0 to height. And our mouth, we don't want it to be like 0 because then we wouldn't be able to see it. So we'll say the smallest value is what we have already, the mouth size divided by 5. So I'll just put that in there. And then for the largest value, I'll just do the mouth size, like the full mouth size. So it'll be as tall as it is wide. And I can always change that later. So then I'm going to substitute the mouth height for the mouth size over 2. So this is looking a little complicated because there's a lot of variables here. So let's just go over what each variable is. The mouth height is obviously how high we want the mouth to be. So we're using the map function. We're taking the mouse y, the position of the mouse, and we're mapping that in its range, 0 to height. So from the top of the canvas to the bottom of the canvas. And then we're converting that to a different range, the mouth size where it was, to the full mouth size of the width. So that's our math there. Then to draw the mouth, we're drawing a rectangle at the x position of our character minus 50. So we're going back to the left a little bit to center it. And then the y position of the character plus 100. So the middle of our character plus a little bit. So we move down the face. And then the width of the mouth is the mouth size that we originally created. The height of the mouth is our new mouth height variable. And then this is our rounded corners. We're just going to leave those the way they are. So now, if I move the mouse down, I can make my character talk. And so maybe the user could use this as an avatar on their web page or something like that. And they could set this to interact with something and record it as they're talking or something like that. There's a lot of things that you could do with this, but it basically gives me like a little avatar, and I can just move the mouse to make the character talk. So that's something very simple and fun. Because we're just using these simple variables, it's not really clear. There's nothing here that says like you have to make the character talk. And so in order to add that in, we actually haven't learned P5 text yet. We are going to learn that next week, or in 2 weeks, I think. No, I think next week. So let's just put in some new HTML. I'm just going to put a little paragraph below our menu, and I'm going to say move the mouse up and down to make me talk, since it is a self-portrait. So just giving some sort of little reference. I guess I got to move this out of the header so it's not. Okay, there we go. And that's pretty small, so if I wanted to fix that, I could go over to my style.css and just say, paragraph font size is 2em. Just make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so now we have some very clear instructions to the user so they know what to do. Move the mouse up and down to make me talk. And there we go. So I'm saying some stuff. So, it's not super complicated, but it's meaningful in the sense that, we're changing something about the self-portrait that is representative of something in the real world. Oh, and then I can see that if I move the mouse above, then I actually flip the mouth upside down. So maybe that's kind of fun. We can leave that in. So that's our simple interactive self-portrait. When you guys are creating your own interactive self-portrait, try to think about different ways that you can make it interactive that might be meaningful to you. So, if you're making something with a soccer player, you can move the soccer ball around. If you're making something with a skateboarder, you could move, the whole character around the screen with the skateboard. However you want to approach it, you can make it fun for the user. And do something unique to you. So I don't want to see any other moving mouths projects unless there's something unique about it. Try to think about what can I do with the color, the shape, and the size of these simple drawings to make something meaningful to me. So now that I've created this, I want to save a thumbnail and make a link so that my users can access this from the portfolio. So I finished this self-portrait. So I'm going to do save. This is my version 3 self-portrait, so I'll just call this version 3. So again, I'm just using the console to do this, so I don't have to actually put it in my project. So I'm just going to hit save here. And then I'm going to go to the Finder. Well, my Finder window is not open, so I could make a new Finder window, or I can just go to GitHub and show in Finder. So here's my project. Here's my self-portrait version 3. There's my thumbnail from the previous one, so I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to open a new Finder window and grab that downloaded image that I just saved. And so I'm going to throw that in here. And so then I'm just going to add the link to the self-portrait. So I'm going to close all this stuff out and then just go to index.html for my main MMP 210 folder and scroll down here. So here's my self-portrait. The new thumbnail is at self-portrait v3/v3.png. So that's version 3 of the self-portrait. And now I have a link to fill in here, self-portrait v3. And I can update this. So this is self-portrait version 3 interactive. And so now if I go back to my home page, there we go. So I can click on that, and there's my interactive self-portrait. Go back home. And so now we can see the evolution of this project. So yeah, that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions or you need help with anything. Try to think about something creative and unique you can do with your self-portrait to make it interactive. And also make sure to check out the instructions for the assignment. It is required to use the map function at least once, so make sure to use that as well. So if you need help reviewing that, let me know. To review, since we are at the beginning of the semester, I closed those windows, but I forgot to add this on GitHub. So I'm going to go back to GitHub, and every time you finish a new project or even make a simple update to your website, just go back to the GitHub desktop app, type in a new summary. So I'm just going to say adds interactive self-portrait and commit to master and push to origin. And so that's what's going to make this go actually to your website. You definitely want to double check and make sure it actually worked, because sometimes a few of you guys have seen this. Sometimes something that works on your local version of your project is not going to work online if the naming conventions are wrong or something like that. So if you click on view on GitHub, that's going to bring up your self-portrait on GitHub. You can always access the link to your portfolio going to the settings. You can also just type that in. If you know your GitHub name, you just start with your GitHub name, .github.io, and then the name of your repository. So mine is MMP210. And then there we go. So just make sure it works. Double check, that looks good. And so there's your link to submit on Blackboard, and that we'll look at in class.